I'm Nick Coppin, Community Manager at In Situ, and we're going to get started with the zoning workshop. This is Pablo from Zilvas. We'll be your instructors today, along with staff from In Situ in the room helping out. Who here is from the public sector? Who here works for a city or, okay, and who is from the private sector? Who here is involved in organized community groups? Civil sector. Awesome. Cool. So we're going to talk about zoning today, but you do not need to know anything about zoning. In fact, I'm a pretty newbie when it comes to New York City zoning, and Pablo is going to give us a zoning 101. But one of the issues with open data, who here has heard of the term open washing? This was maybe a mid-2010s word, open washing. The idea when that word came around in the open data movement was when we had liberated a lot of open data at cities, and then we realized that you can't just make these data sets available if people don't know how to use them, how to digest them, and how to understand them. And so one of the things we're talking about today is that there's plenty of zoning data available from City of New York. There's also building permit data, lots of public data about the built environment, but that doesn't mean that we can use it easily or understand it. And now, in situ, we work with community engagement, unlocking better conversations around the built environment. But even with civic engagement, think about the civic engagement events you've been to, most of them are around particular projects at the right point in time where they say, okay, it's time for civic engagement. There's a huge gap in participation or in between those projects in your daily life as you walk around the city where you could be experiencing that data, but it's just not there. It's not available to you. So we're thinking about how could we bring the data from the shelves out into the urban environment. And in order to do that, first, it helps to have it in 3D. And so that's where Zilvas comes in. I'll tell you a little bit about who we are as In Situ and then introduce Pablo. But the challenge today, the question to think about is we're all experimenting together to figure out how can we interact with open data from the first person perspective at eye level out in the street. What types of art styles do we need? What types of storytelling do we need to bring it back to how most ordinary people understand the city, which is from eye level at first person on the street? So that's an open question. We haven't figured it out. We have materials to build with. We have paper, we have clay, we have 3D models, and we can do a lot of different ideas. You're free to experiment, and we're going to help you get that eventually by the end of this workshop into augmented reality so you can see it from your phone outside. We want to leave plenty of time for that, so I'll jump into it. So In Situ, we are a startup based here in New York City. Donna, our founder and CEO, is over there. So Donna's an architect, and when In Situ started, the idea is like architects kind of already see in 3D, and you might walk around. Who's an architect anyway? So if you walk around the city and you're an architect, I guess the idea is you have the superpower where you can just see what's coming up. And if you're around the city and know the permits and work on these projects, you know as you walk around what's there, what's invisible. But most people can't do that. So to give that superpower to everyone would really improve our conversations around cities, is what Donna thought when we started In Situ. And now we use AR as a way to bring that invisible information out into the urban environment and make better conversations. And so we take the planning data into the urban context using smartphone and iPad-based augmented reality from a QR code on the sidewalk or in a pamphlet you would be able to access, and you can see things in their natural place with the urban context around it. So we work with city governments, we work with architecture firms, construction firms, and developers. We also work with community groups. We also work with other technology companies that are doing similar things. Our sort of philosophy is to be accessible, intuitive, and empowering. And this is why we also don't use like glasses or the latest, greatest XR gear, because something about the smartphone is actually better is that you can just view it with a group. The ability to look over someone's shoulder and have a group experience is really key to what we do. And so we like to play with what's already in people's pockets. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Pablo, and I have a bio here to read. What is it? So Pablo has 12 years. Pablo's, how do you say your last name? Sepulveda has 12 years of professional experience working in planning, design, and construction of architecture and urban projects in New York, California, and Chile, Working in different site environments and diverse office settings throughout the Americas has made him an efficient project manager, outstanding team member, and fluent communicator. Pablo has extensive experience with NYC zoning, specializing in analysis and interpretation of the resolution while working on numerous feasibility and massing studies for potential developments in the city. He's a registered architect in New York State, licensed architect in Chile, and LEED AP BD+C certified. Without further ado, let's talk about zoning 101. Yeah, and while you're talking, you can build. Like, if you don't know what we're doing, we'll explain it later, but basically these are the footprints, 2 envelopes that are next to us here. And this is like the zoning code. Within this envelope, you can propose a building, but there are certain rules to that. But don't worry about the rules. If you want to start building and figuring out how to fill that up with some kind of 3D construction with paper or clay, go ahead and do it while we're...
Well, thank you everyone for being here. And my name is Pablo Sepulveda, as Nick gracefully explained. So I also am an architect, and I founded Selvas 2 years back, which is basically an urban analytics platform seeking to guide users to successfully navigate the complexities of New York City zoning. So when we look at a city and we observe the skyline, the massing among us, we tend to focus solely on the construction. But behind these buildings exist invisible lines and planes that pretty much govern the overall massing of a building, right? And basically zoning shapes our cities, but navigating the regulations, specifically in New York City, is very complex and challenging. So what we're doing with Selvas is transforming complex rules into digital insight, making zoning easier to understand and to use, right? Zoning is basically a tool that the city uses to manage growth, and we're trying to make that tool more accessible to the community. So I'm going to start with a very quick, brief explanation of what is zoning, very big level, and we'll get into the fun part after, so I'm going to try to rush through this. So this is Zoning 101. While modern zoning is relatively a recent concept, the regulations of land use date back to the early civilizations, right? So ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Rome, and several other civilizations throughout history have had some sort of approach to some sort of regulations that ultimately seeks to govern or control urban growth, right? And the 3 leading principles behind these necessity of figuring out ways to control urban growth is really public health and safety, which is basically managing sanitation, waste, and fire risks, economic and social order, and then access to light and air, which is a key principle of zoning overall. As a matter of fact, the Romans were the first known civilization to regulate explicitly access to light and air, right? So it's the Lex Julia Municipalis law, circa 45 BCE, implemented by Julius Caesar, that seek to really kind of control access to light, right? So they established maximum building heights for all properties within the city walls to really make sure that everybody had access to light and air. And I was reading the other day that's interesting that arguments used in the court to really implement this law was the divinity of the sun, right? The sun is a natural element. It was a Roman god, and everybody had equal access to this natural element that, of course, brings health benefits and so many other facilities, right? So fast forward to New York City in the 19th century, where New York City, given the immigration during the 19th century, led to an overpopulation and city growth. So I think within 50 years, the population in New York City grew 700%. It grew from 125,000 to 1 million in no more than 50 years. This, of course, without the proper sanitation and infrastructure, led to situations as we could see here, right? So the densification and overcrowding led to living conditions that brought a lot of health concerns and quality of life situations, right? So these photos represent a little bit of the conditions in which the people that migrated to the United States lived in, right? They lived in tenement housing that became densified in a very short period of time, with lack of access to sanitation and lack of access to natural light and air, etc. And this image here kind of reflects the evolution of the tenement housing. And it's not until Tenement House Act of 1901 here where regulations really started to come into place to regulate visa growth, right? So what you see here is a standard 25 by 100 property zoning lot in New York City, and the original foundation, which really had single family housing, and how this property went evolving, densifying, And basically you could see these are rooms that really didn't have access to any light and air. There was rules that started to come into place around 1879 that said like you had to provide windows. What developers would do would install windows within the corridor, which really didn't have any purpose. So throughout the time, rules started coming into place, and it's not until the new law in 1901 where we start seeing the movement of city to try to legislate this and growth and zoning. But it's not until really this building, the Ecuador building in 1915, that really started broke the camel's back, you may say, right? So in 1915, so this is the most emblematic case leading to the creation of the 1916 zoning resolution, which is the first comprehensive citywide zoning law in the United States. There was a few examples in Los Angeles in 1908, I believe, but it wasn't citywide. So this is the first. And this is the Ecuador building, which at the time, opponents of the building were outraged at its unprecedented volume, which cast 7-acre shadows over surrounding streets. Many New Yorkers feared that further construction of buildings would turn Manhattan into an unpleasant dark maze of streets. So again, this is the project that really led to the creation of the 1916 zoning resolution, which basically contains a set of rules written in a legal manner that outlines how you could develop a property, right? It organizes use, density, maximum building heights. It introduces interesting concepts such as sky exposure plane, which has the ultimate intention of bringing light to the streets, to the public right of way, similarly to the ancient Romans, right? So, and then we come to the evolution. So the zoning resolution is a living document, and the foundation or the origins, it was composed of 14 pages. And so throughout the years, you can see how many pages have been added to this, right? And our question at Solvus is how many pages more how many more pages are necessary really to kind of create this? Are we going to end up in 2050 with 4,000, or what's really the limit? Because it's not just the pages itself, it's also the complexity of the document itself, right? So there's an extract, it's a little gem I found on the resolution that basically specifically governs 2 streets in a neighborhood. I even seen the resolution mention specific properties in a lot. So, and it's the complexity upon which it's written. So I'm just going to read this out loud. So it's almost like a tongue twister. The maximum height of street walls within 10 feet of a wide street line shall be 150 feet beyond 15 feet of a narrow street line and 85 feet within 15 feet of a narrow street line. So on one hand, the city is telling us that we should comply. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for these regulations because they really kind of have made us evolve into the current city we have today. But the lack of access, I see zoning as a boundary, and I think everyone should have access to really be able to interpret and understand these rules that we're supposed to live by, right? So, and that kind of leads us to open data, which 13th anniversary celebrating it, and this is kind of our basic material that at Solvus we're using. So we're basically compiling all these open data sets from different departments in New York City, and transferring data sets or information from one layer to another, compiling a master data set that kind of digitizes these regulations into geospatial information in order to really be able to visualize these regulations in real time. And another interesting characteristic of New York City zoning, which I think is fascinating, is its flexibility on one hand, but then also the way it reacts to its surrounding. It's in some jurisdictions, zoning generally tends to be you have a property, you have a zoning district, and you have straightforward rules to abide by. But New York City reacts to its surroundings. So if you're in front of a park, you can't do a tower. If you're in front of a narrow street, there's maximum building height. If you're within 100 feet of a wide street, there's additional regulations allowed, right? That's super interesting. And the other side, the flexibility you're allowed. So you're allowed different types of bulk types or envelopes or building shapes that other zonings don't typically have, which is pretty cool. So at Solvus, what we're doing is kind of digitizing all these rules in the sense that you could understand the uses allowed on a property. And based on these uses, you could see the different options that New York allows you to really implement. And then once you select the use and the bulk type, you're allowed to visualize these rules in real time. So there's sky exposure planes, there's towers, there's quality housing, which is recently been revised in the City of Gas updates that came out last year. And the bottom line to really understand is the analogy of the bottle and the water that we use in-house to kind of differentiate sets of rules that the New York City zoning resolution has. So on one hand, the bottle is a maximum envelope. A building cannot go beyond this bottle unless it's a tower and you just unscrew this cord. But and then on the other the other way that the city regulates density is through water, which is basically floor area ratio, or how many square feet you could really build within a property. So that's where the flexibility comes into place, and architects could explore different shapes and different lot coverage, heights, etc. But the bottom line, or really key to understand, is how this, like, we have as architects flexibility to really manage our buildings within these maximum envelopes, right? And with that said, we'll get into the fun part here, which is really an exercise. So we're currently located here at NYC Law School. We selected 2 projects here on the neighboring blocks that really kind of outline how like delicate New York City zoning is. So this zone district here separates 2 blocks, right? And you can see how the different density regulations govern each separate property. So on one hand, we have Hunter Street, which, and another point, so this property in itself has 4 layers of zoning layers overlaid to it. So each of these layers brings in its own package of complexities that have to be referenced into the zoning text. On one hand, we have a property that has a maximum height of 100 with 5 FAR, which the FAR, we could say it's the water, how much square feet you could fill into the bottle. Right here, you have the base heights that are the bottle. And on the other property here, we have a maximum SBR of 12, right? So FAR way of understanding it is not technically how many floors you could build, because FAR is basically a simple equation of multiplying this number by the square feet of your property. And that'll dictate how many square feet you could ultimately build on a property. So with that said, I guess let's get into the fun part.
Cool. Okay, so that was a very
Really sound way or explains it.
You just explained thousands of and
I would not blame you if you're still intimidated by this, because we're going to be playing with these today. But I just want to say that the point of this exercise is not to calculate the floor area ratio with paper. We're not going to know. The point of this exercise is to start to feel it, because all of these numbers have a feeling when you're on the street. And if you're walking through a neighborhood that has FAR 5, it feels different than a neighborhood that has an FAR 10. So all we want to do with this exercise is to experiment with creating those feelings, basically. And how can we do that? What are the different ways we can do that? And so, Ziva, I don't know if you want to help me explain the materials we have, dear.
Yeah. So for the 2 building envelopes, we have these printed sheets of paper that you can fold into the mass envelope. And so you can play with these and you can cut into them, draw on them, whatever makes sense for you to describe what you're envisioning as the use of this envelope. And what I did here is, for example, we played with colors that represent different zonings. So commercial, traditionally, and then manufacturing and residential. And what we're going to do is, after you put these kind of models together, we're going to scan them in 3D, and we're going to place them in augmented reality on site. So after this workshop, you'll be able to go outside, just scan a QR and see your vision in real scale.
So it's 12:30 now, and I know lunch starts at 1:50, and some people probably want to run off the list a little early. So in the 30 minutes that we have until 1, the idea is we're going to do some building. We also have the 3D models of these zoning envelopes from Sylvest, and we've already placed them in augmented reality outside. So if anyone wants a break from building, there's the windows on the other side of this floor are a great point to see the first one here. And we can have some staff out there to show you if you want to take a look at it in person. We also have in situ a mode where you can look at the 3D models on the tabletop, and that can be very useful for seeing what you're building to compare it to the 3D envelope. And I can come around and show folks, you can scan a QR code to get it up in your own phone, and we also have it up on ours if you want to check your construction against the 3D envelope.
Just quick question. It's a buzzword, but would you say your software is equivalent to building a digital city or a digital twin? I mean,
yeah, a lot of people talk about digital twins. I think the most restrictive definition of a digital twin is like a warehouse 3D model where the things in the 3D model are actually connected to real life objects, and it's
doing what the real life object is doing, that very simulacra. But a lot of people use it just to talk about any 3D map of city. And in that sense, what we're trying to do as in situ, and I think also what Pablo's trying to do, is create additional layers on top of that, because most times people talk about a digital twin as a map of the existing conditions and existing structures. There's more gray, whereas this is like a layer of the future and also a layer of the possible, or a layer of the law. So thank you. Great. So break. We're gonna walk around and we can see what you're doing, help out if you have questions. The staff is Pablo, I'm Nick, Zeeb, our head of design at In Situ's here, Sydney from In Situ, and Donna over there. You can all ask us all questions.
She's not moving there.
And during lunch, we're gonna put these out on the street. So later when you're leaving, this is how you'll be able to see